Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and today on the podcast, whose responsibility is it to educate the consumer about what's going on in the coffee supply chain? This is a conversation that ran as a common thread throughout all of the Global Coffee Townhalls. So if you were lucky enough to attend in person and be a part of that conversation, you'll know how rich the discussion was. If you haven't checked it out, it's available on our YouTube channel in the playlist Global Coffee Town Hall. Before we get started, if you are looking at creating a super successful 2022, consider taking one of the 6-week workshops that we have coming up that start in the first week of November. Head to the show notes for links and for details on that. So, whose responsibility is it to educate the consumer about what's going on in the coffee supply chain? And that means the increase in the price of coffee, the decrease in the yield of coffee, how difficult it is to get access to spot coffee if that's the way that you run your business. Whose responsibility is it to educate the consumer on what all the different kinds of coffees there are? One might say it's the individual's roaster's responsibility to do this. I believe, and let me just take a step back there and clarify what I just said. A lot of people think that as a small business owner, it's your job as the roaster to communicate on the bag of coffee what's going on with the specific product that people are buying. Now, sure, that's one part of the situation. But I believe, and I've said this many times on the podcast, so forgive me for repeating myself, we have a severe branding problem in coffee, and that problem is about to get worse thanks to Nescafe, and we will talk about that in a future episode. But the branding problem that we have in coffee is all about the fact that instant coffee is called coffee, roasted coffee is called coffee, high-end specialty coffee that costs $100 a cup is still called coffee, filter coffee is called coffee, cold brew coffee is called coffee. All of these different things are called coffee. And nobody is taking the lead on deciphering the messaging to the consumer. In the Global Coffee Town Hall, especially in the English discussion, it became really relevant that people agree that this is a big problem. Incidentally, the evening of that discussion, some really interesting information came to light purely by happenstance about something that Nestle and Nescafe that are doing that are going to further contribute to the challenges in that. But the issue is around educating the consumer. We all think that it's a lot of the governing bodies like SCA and the ICO that are responsible for signaling to consumers what's going on. And that's not happening. And I would argue that it's not their job to do that. They are trade organizations. They are nonprofits. We would hope that they would do that, but as has been made clear to me by a number of people that work for those organizations, that is not their responsibility. Their responsibility is the supply chain and the trade of coffee. So who takes care of this? If we leave it up to whoever's going to do it, nobody's going to do it other than the big corporates, and they determine the messaging. They are saying to the consumer in very simple language, we give you responsibly sourced coffee. That's all they say. They're not talking about the prices of coffee. Big media is starting to talk about that. And we don't want to leave this to big media to be talking about because they're not going to be giving the adequate signaling either. But yet we are left with the idea of, well, then if it's not going to be them and it's not going to be SCA and it's not going to be the ICO, who's going to take the lead? And quite frankly, I don't have an answer for you. Over the last few decades, small businesses have tried to do that, but because we have a couple of different what we call waves of coffee, that messaging is inconsistent as well, and rightfully so. You've got the second wave that are selling commercial coffee. You've got the third and what I guess is emerging as the fourth wave talking about specialty grade coffee. And because they're different products, we're ending up in a completely different signal that's going to people. We need to find a way to clearly identify what coffee is as a brand and how we're going to speak openly to consumers in a unified way about that. We can still have competition once we've got that clearly defined. But we are a long way off from having that clearly defined. And what the Global Coffee Townhall told us is that people want some clarity around that. They're happy to get on board with delivering that message, but somebody needs to be setting the standard of what the clarity of that discussion is. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this and who you think should be setting the narrative of who gets to decide who educates the consumer. Tell us in the show notes, tell us on social media, or you can send us an email. I'm very intrigued to hear what people's thoughts are about this. We're in very interesting times, friends. And I hope we're heading towards some clarity. But it's no mystery that our industry is changing. And as an industry changes, this is the time where we start getting the clarity that our consumers need around what that change looks like. Stay tuned for a future episode where we talk about this Nescafe interesting thing that I found out. Anyway, peace, love, and peanut butter, friends. Have an amazing rest of your day.